Welcome to Around the Drafting Table, where we talk about topics that are top of mind for homeowners looking to design a new home. I am Kory Cox, the Oxford architect. Our topic today is general contracting. Who you pick to build your home will ensure a smooth or tumultuous process. Joining us today, we have award-winning general contractor David Thorne, CEO of Construction Management Pros. David, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
To begin, would you like to briefly talk about Construction Management Pros and what sets your firm apart from other contractors?
I've been in construction for a really long time. My dad was a general contractor. I've owned my own general contracting business, and been in construction on my own as a business owner for the better part of the last 11 years.
Hmm.
And the interesting thing that has always come up throughout my career and throughout my time in construction, um, has been the experience of clients that range the gamut, right? Not just
Hmm.
homeowners that are doing a remodel, but a new build, business owners and such. And so for me, I recognized this a handful of years ago, really seriously for the first time. And I actually had a client that came to me and said, David, I just am so sick. I was working for another contractor at the time, and and she just said, I'm so sick of um, the experience part. Like I just can't do it
Hmm.
anymore. And if you could fix this, you would have a customer for me for a lifetime. And
What,
of
what was it
course,
about the experience that she had difficulty with?
yeah, of course, my entrepreneurial red flags were going off,
Hmm.
and I was hearing bells. But she listed the three core things that I think everyone struggles with.
Okay.
It rang true to me because I saw this my entire career, and that's a lack of transparency, where it's not just transparency on money, but transparency on schedule and like when contractors say, "Oh yeah, drywall guys are going to be there," Monday, Friday morning, and then they don't
Hmm.
show up. Um, that's difficult for families and homeowners and business owners.
Yeah.
It was a lack of transparency on cost, where they felt like they were told one thing, hey, your project's going to cost 250,000 and it ends up being 350,000,
Right.
and feeling like they just didn't know where all the money was going and how they wound up there.
Hmm.
And then it was a lack of communication. It was simply just um, not knowing when things were happening and when they were, or when there was communication, they felt talked down to, or they felt, they just were this some superior thing. And it's always been the friction between the owner and the contractor. And growing up in construction, it was always this necessary thing. It's like, oh yeah, well, they're owners, they don't know anything, and it just is what it is.
Hmm. Yeah.
Well, when my client said this to me, I just realized, well, why does it have to be that way? And so the idea of Construction Management Pros was founded. And 3 years ago, I started Construction Management Pros with this exact idea, to change the narrative, to change the story behind what a general contracting experience should be. And so we've created our signature concierge construction experience, which takes a white glove client experience focus to a construction journey.
Okay. Perfect. What type of luxury or custom homes have you worked on recently? Can you share any project details or outcomes?
Yeah, I'll tell you about one that is really cool that we're doing now. We've got a client in South Jordan, who had bought their house maybe 2019, so maybe about 5 years ago. Fairly new house, really nice neighborhood,
Hmm.
uh, but it's not like an enormously big house. But
Okay.
they contacted us because they wanted to take their house from like really nice to the max, to finish their basement, to totally gut their first floor,
Okay.
um, and to remodel their second floor. We also are adding a pool house, a pool, and a underground basketball court with a tunnel to their existing basement.
An underground basketball court.
Yes, an underground basketball court. Kind of like, Michael Jordan's version of like a bunker, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're building, and we're super excited about this. It's a
Hmm.
unique project. We actually have another project that is almost very similar in Highland that we're hopeful will close here in the next little bit. But so it's kind of interesting that we found ourselves doing almost two of the identical projects. But these kinds of things are really fun for me because they're unique. And that's the
Yeah.
best part about custom is you get to take someone else's dream, the thing that they have spent nights and weekends talking, pillow talk
Hmm.
with their wife or their husband about like their dreams about what they want their house to be, and then you get to transform their house into the thing that they've been dreaming of for years.
Yeah. As a segue into our next question, looking at like an underground, bunker scenario, whether it's a basketball court or otherwise, what are some of the significant challenges you run into during construction, and what are like long-term concerns that owners should think about?
Yeah, so there's a lot that goes into it that is behind the scenes. As an architect, you are intimately aware of
Hmm.
this, like from an engineering and architectural standpoint. There's a lot of money that's going to be going out the door and being spent up
Yep.
front before you see a single ounce of dirt get moved.
Hmm.
There's surveying and engineering and all of the things, right? And logistically on a project like this one in South Jordan, you're digging a 30-foot hole in the ground.
Yep.
It's not as easy. And when you're in a tight neighborhood like that, you can't just dig a 30-foot hole. It requires one of two methods to dig that size of hole. You have to have the step method where you kind of take
Hmm.
a little bit and it takes additional space to get down to that depth, and then you can backfill.
Right.
But you have to be able to compact the dirt as you backfill. You can't just like throw the dirt back on it
Right.
once you have
Yep.
the structure in place.
Very important.
But you also have to consider that if you don't have the space to dig a hole that size, then you have to retain the dirt. So now you have forms that are in place to hold the dirt back so that you can put the foundation in and then backfill. And that comes with a huge added cost,
Hmm.
especially when there's tight spaces, tight things. What I've learned in construction is most of the time when a contractor or even an architect or an engineer says can't be done, what they really mean is I don't want to do that almost 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Because almost anything can be done. We have the technology and the ability to build almost anything. The question really is it affordable? And
Hmm.
do you really want to do it? Those are
Yeah.
the two questions that really should be asked, not can't be done. So most of the time when you hear a contractor tell you, yeah, it can't be done, your ears should perk up and you should be like, wait a second, can't, or you don't want to do it, right? Or it's too
Yeah.
expensive. So those are the questions, but there is a ton of logistical
Hmm.
uh, things to consider when doing a project of that kind of size and scope. And not to mention the engineering required to be able to match up an existing structure and basement with a new structure via tunnel.
Right.
Uh, now, luckily, we don't have Elon's boring company coming in and doing that, but like
Hmm.
there is a lot to consider there. So there is a lot of money that's being spent up front to answer all of the questions and eliminate as many of the unknowns as possible up front. And then once we get into construction, we're not problem solving the things that we should have already had answers to in
Right.
the beginning, which is usually
Absolutely.
where your delays and your cost increases and all of those things come from.
Yep. And that's the basis of my whole job.
Exactly.
All the pre-planning. That's what we do. So, aside from challenges that you see on that kind of project, what are some other challenges you've seen on high-end custom homes, and how do you overcome them?
Yeah, customer selections. Whether it's like we're building a med spa for a client currently. This is her life savings that she is pouring into this med spa. It's her business, sure. And I
Hmm.
think that there's myth, and I think there is some degree of truth to this, but there's a myth out there that commercial construction is less emotional. And in some cases, that's certainly true.
Yeah.
Um, but then there are other cases, a lot of cases where it's not true. This is an owner of a business it's a small business and they're dumping their entire life savings into this and then some to be able to realize their dream. And so when you're considering the challenges of a custom project, whether it be a home or a business, a lot of it comes down to selections and clarity on the end result. And oftentimes once we get down the road, things start to change and they're like, well, actually, as they start seeing this thing come together, not everybody is a visionary. Like for me, I see pictures in my brain. And so
Hmm.
it's easy for me to imagine and see the completed structure
Yes.
just based off of drawings or even words. Like I can see it in my brain. There are
Yeah.
people that
Anyone who
are
works in
not
the industry, I
visual.
think, gets used to that, and we visualize really easily. And it's easy for professionals to forget that our clients don't live and breathe that like we do.
That's right. Yeah, and so you have to take the extra step. And I think this is where the communication and the transparency and the detail comes in advance, putting in the work up front to help the client to the best of our ability see the vision, see the picture.
Hmm.
And we are blessed with so much technology nowadays. If someone it almost it's almost like you choose to just not utilize the technology nowadays. It becomes a choice for contractors or architects to not utilize that technology to help the client see the vision.
Yeah.
And so the selection process is really important. And then being willing to be flexible because again, this is their dream. And even though they made a selection up here, if we're so rigid that we can't account for those things that change down the road, then that makes for a really bad client experience. And I think we have to have processes and systems in place that allow for continuity, but also allow for flexibility.
Okay. Perfect. So you hinted at this a little bit earlier when you were talking about how you set up your firm, but what do you do in more specific terms to manage timelines and budgets, particularly when working on unique or complex designs?
Yeah, this is I mean anything custom it becomes really challenging to
Hmm.
it's not just selections management and specifications management, but it's also timeline management and budget management. We actually utilize a tool called Builder Trend. It's a software that basically contains all of those things into one.
Hmm.
It's not perfect by any means,
Yeah.
but a lot of the other softwares that I've seen, um, this is at the top of allowing transparency into the process for a homeowner. It provides a homeowner login so that
Hmm.
they can see the schedule, they can see the budget, they can see all of those things, change orders, they can approve change orders, they can ask RFIs or request for information.
Yep.
They can see all of those things there in their portal, which as well as pictures and job updates or daily logs that we keep. And so when we're talking about managing that, I think first you have to set the expectation up front with not only the client of what the schedule is going to look like, which means they have to know it, which means you have to create it,
Hmm.
right? So as a general contractor, rather than just take the typical general contractor method of winging it, because we've done this thousands of times, taking the time to put the schedule into Builder Trend and then making sure that all of your subs are also linked to that schedule and Builder Trend so that everybody
Yeah.
is on the same page. So when there are delays or there are things that have been expedited, everyone gets with one button click everyone gets notified at once and everyone's on the same page, all downline schedule. So
Hmm.
so that way it just streamlines communication, not only with subs and construction partners, but also the client. And then like actually watching the budget. Like you upload the budget, they sign everything in Builder Trend. So then like let's watch it. Let's keep track of the costs. Let's upload it and keep Builder Trend up to date so that the client
Yeah.
can see an accurate picture of where they stand. And now I'm not suggesting we do everything on a cost plus basis. I think every project needs to have a contract basis that fits the project. And
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
I've learned that a single brushstroke doesn't cover all things. And so when we can just be flexible with the type of contract, whether it's a cost plus contract, a fixed price contract, or a design build, design bid build contract, whatever the contract type you decide to go with that fits for that client, um, giving them as much of the transparency as possible is really key to
Yeah.
that. But again, that goes back to the upfront cost of actually creating the schedule up front and then presenting it to the client and say, hey, this is our proposed schedule. Does this work for you? Is there anything in this schedule, birthdays, anniversaries, like uh, family reunions that are going to
Hmm.
interfere with this schedule? And let's talk about that today before we've even dug a single shovel full of dirt.
A very important point to talk about there. Clients are an integral partner
Yeah.
throughout design and construction. And if they're going to be gone for 2 weeks, your work is going to be impacted and there might be some slowdowns as a result. And so I think
Yeah.
it's very smart to build that into the schedule right up front.
Yeah, because it's all about expectation. I've learned early in my life that all disappointment in life comes from unmet expectation.
Hmm.
It's that
Yeah.
simple. And so if your client is upset with you, the question is to ask yourself, is what expectation was conveyed that wasn't met? Or if you're upset with your contractor because they did X, Y, and Z, it may not necessarily be the contractor's fault per se because they did something wrong, but there was some unmet expectation that exists that most likely came because of miscommunication or a lack of transparency. And so then it just drilling down on the simple thing of like, what's the thing that was miscommunicated? Where's the disconnect? And then identifying that problem. So if we can establish really clear expectations up front and then maintain clear communication along the way to reestablish expectations, because you know as well as I do,
Hmm.
just because you create a schedule in the start of a project doesn't mean that's what the schedule ends up being as the project goes. Because
Sure. Yeah.
especially
There
with
will be changes.
remodels, things change. It's
Yeah.
construction, so you don't know what you know until you dig,
Yeah.
right? Or
Well,
open.
so let's talk about changes then. You mentioned a change order.
Mhm.
What is a change order and what is the role of that tool in addressing changes in scope or budget that arise during construction?
Yeah, this is an awesome question. So there's two methods of thinking. There's this a lot of contractors hate change orders, and so what they will
Hmm.
default to do, because change orders require a lot of management,
Hmm. Yeah, they do.
um, what contractors typically will do is just default to what is called a cost plus contract, which basically means I I don't want to do change orders, so I'm just going to bill you for whatever the cost is as we go. And so if you change
Hmm.
your mind, I'm just sending you the bill, Mr. Client, for the extra money, and I'm not required to put together anything against cost or original cost versus new cost. I don't have to send you a change order, have you sign it, because it's just cost plus and you're the bank and I'm just going to treat you like that. So here's the bill, Mr. Client, right?
Right.
I expect the payment in 2 days.
Yeah.
And that's where you get cost overruns. I think cost plus contracts are good for very specific types of projects. And so I
Yeah.
don't
I've
want to
I've seen them
totally,
on very large institutional projects,
yes,
and on very small projects that, as you talk about, some contractors don't want to do the paperwork.
yes. like for instance, when the construction on the temple in Salt Lake City, I
Hmm.
can almost guarantee you this is not a fixed price contract. This is a cost plus contract because
Yeah.
they've never done anything like this before.
Hmm.
And it's such a massive project that it's hard to actually estimate or come up with any sort of real estimate on the
Yeah.
project.
It's
And
a really good example of a renovation project where there's a lot of unknowns.
a lot of
And
unknowns.
how could you break that down and figure out exactly how much the project's going to cost when you just don't know so much? Um, and that's how I see transportation projects go, airports and train lines, that kind of thing.
Exactly. So, so when you have a change order, it's because you're not having a cost plus project. Now, some
Yeah.
contractors may still implement some sort of change order process, even with a cost plus contract, because they just want to try and give transparency to their client,
Hmm.
which is a good step. That's what we want to see. But generally, we want to put together a sheet of paper or digital form that says, "Hey, you authorized this change. It's going to cost this. It's going to add this much time to your project.
Yep.
Are you okay with that before we proceed?"
Yeah. And then it's signed by you, it's signed by myself, the architect, and it's signed by the owner.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that way everyone's on the same page that says, "Okay, I know it's going to add 2 weeks to our timeline. I know that it's going to add this much to our overall budget." So you can see the change, the difference. You can see the change on the overall budget, and you can see that everybody is in agreement. So when it comes back to it, and they're like, "Well, why is this so much different cost wise?" Or, "We're 2 weeks over. You told me in the beginning." Um, we can produce that document. And usually in my experience, now
Hmm.
I don't know that it could happen at some point, but usually in my experience, when you have a detailed change order process, those conversations actually never end up happening,
Yeah.
because the client is pretty aware that the reasons why it's taking longer than originally told. So
Yeah. The one component that I feel like doesn't get captured in change orders is weather delay. So
yes.
do you track that separately and keep that very transparent and using a different mechanism?
So in our daily logs, we actually build what we call fluff into a schedule to
Uh-huh.
account for weather. Now, there's no scientific, I mean, the weatherman can't even tell you if it's going to rain or snow today
Hmm.
with any degree of accuracy,
Yeah.
unless they're looking out the window and saying it's snowing. And so it's hard for a contractor to do that. And so
Yep.
what we do is we build in fluff into a schedule. These are built-in days. So if a electrician tells us, "Hey, it's going to take 10 days to do our work," we'll put in 11 or 12, right? So that we can account for maybe that electrician, whether it's a change order or just things happening, that we can account for an additional time period. And we do that for almost all the trades. And so when it comes down to, you may have a surplus of extra unused days. Those typically will get used because of weather, especially with any of the exterior trades that have to do their work outside. So excavation, concrete,
Yeah.
framing, um, roofing. Like, you can't have someone installing a roof uh, when it's a blizzard outside. It's
Yeah.
just not smart. So,
Right.
um,
And
and
very unsafe.
and very unsafe, and can cause massive delays on your project if someone gets hurt.
Hmm.
Massive cost overruns with insurance and other things if someone gets hurt. So weather delays should be accounted for, and we do, for every trade, even the trades that are inside that shouldn't be affected by weather. Oftentimes we'll always give a little bit of padding because we know that somewhere we're going to account for it. And I
Right.
would rather come to you and say, "Hey, we've built in 10 fluff days into our total schedule for your project, or 30 or whatever," and say, "Hey, we're going to be a day over than what I told you,"
Hmm.
rather than come to you and say, "Hey, we're going to be 31 days over than what I told you." Right.
Absolutely. Yep.
And the opposite is even better. If we built in 30 days into our schedule and I get to deliver the keys to you 2 weeks early, you will be the happiest person on the face of the earth because no contractor delivers keys 2 weeks early, right?
Managing expectations, right?
Right.
Perfect. So separate from that last question, that's about changes that take place during construction. Um, Talking about changes during pre-construction, can you give an example of how you work collaboratively with an architect to adjust or refine the design to improve buildability, functionality, or seek cost efficiencies in the drawings you see from the architect?
Yeah, this is actually really, this is where the collaboration between a contractor and an architect slash engineer can um, can make or break a project.
Hmm.
Because um, architects like to make things really pretty. They like to make sure that there's beautiful sight lines and
Hmm.
great visuals in a home, in a building, what have you. Um, Oftentimes, some of those things that are really important to a client, the client may not recognize how much cost it's actually adding to their project. And so that's when a builder can come in and collaborate with an architect where we don't have to have friction. It doesn't have to be this competitive me versus you. We can come into a project and say, hey, I noticed this on the plans. Could we do this or add, you know, uh, a beam here or put in a piece of steel here
Hmm.
instead? Gets us the same sight lines, but maybe doesn't require as much labor, or maybe
Sure. Hmm.
add a thicker beam here. It might stick down a little bit here, so it's really won't impede the sight line too much. But this cost of wood and a wood beam is going to be significantly less than steel.
Yeah.
And there are things that we can do there to still deliver what the client is expecting, but find areas to save on cost.
Hmm.
Now, there are some clients that just don't care. They just want what they want.
Yeah.
And that's great. I've not met many of those clients, even on these really high-end projects. The reason they can,
Everyone's got a budget. No matter how much money they have, there's still a budget.
that's right, because the reason they have the money to pay for the project is because they're good with their money.
Right.
So
Exactly.
they're frugal, or they're not necessarily frugal, but they are paying attention to.
Hmm. So we've already talked quite a bit about this. The idea of keeping clients informed throughout the process, I think we've covered it pretty well, so I don't want to go back into it. But can you describe a time where you encountered a significant problem, and then how did you handle it? How did it turn out?
Yes. Last year, a couple of years ago, we started the project, but last year we finished. We started a renovation on a building that was in American Fork that was built in 1871.
Hmm.
We encountered significant problems, not just with the age of the building, but um, with the city.
Okay.
I don't mean to disparage American Fork City, but they have been one of the more difficult cities I've ever had to work with, top to bottom. And Mayor Frost is a good friend of mine, so I hope he doesn't like get mad at me for saying this, but I've told this to him I've told this to his face, so it's not anything you will have heard from me already. But
I'm going to
uh,
send him this video as soon as I get it posted.
uh, I just it was really challenging to get the details approved through the city. They were just
Okay.
being really difficult on a, and it wasn't even the building construction side of things. It was really just parking.
Okay. Yeah.
We're throwing giant fits over, and it just stalled the project for months and months and months. And I took a
Hmm.
lot of time at a loss, mind you, because I was cognizant of my client and their budget. Um, to work with the city and figure out how to move this project forward. So
Yeah.
that's number one. Sometimes, like what I've learned is it's not all about the money, right? It's about the principle. And if I truly say that I've got my clients back, I'm going to have my clients back.
Hmm.
So working with cities, when you're considering a building project, you should also consider the city. Um, because the city can make a huge difference in the deliverability of your project in a specific timeline. If you
Yeah.
don't care the timeline, then the city doesn't really matter. The second part on that project is had while we were in this waiting period because the city stalled our project, they green lighted it and then they stalled it. And so
Okay.
in this stalled period, we had a it was in the winter. I was driving home and I just had this thought come to my mind, turn around and go to the building immediately. So I went to the building and I walked in the back door and I found that this building that was built out of mud brick, pressed mud brick, wood fire or fired brick. Um, the water line, the water main, the shutoff at the street failed. The water shut off in the house failed. They were both shut off. They both failed, and water was flowing into the house and
Uh-oh.
dripping out of a cut off um, water line. So we had inherited this project from another contractor that just um, talk about bad contractor experiences. The client fired the contractor and hired
Yeah.
us. They had partially demoed the house. And so they had just chopped off a water line and didn't actually cap it.
Okay.
So the water was leaking out of the the line, and it was on an uh, it was an interior wall, but at one point it was an exterior wall. So it was a mud wall. It was a mud brick wall, and I walked into this seeing this main support wall in this house about 65% collapsed.
Hmm.
And it was just mud. It was all mud. I mean, it was like there was no semblance of brick left. Now I have the conundrum, if you will. Do I all hands on deck, come in here, prop this thing up, make sure that we secure the wall, reframe it, demo it, reframe it, and secure the stacked stone foundation in the basement that's underneath it so that doesn't get disturbed and we have bigger problems. Um, and we do all of that without a permit and risk getting in trouble because we're at a stalled project.
Yep.
Or do I just let the house collapse? Instead, I decided to take that risk
Well,
and
in situations like that, isn't there there's allowances for taking emergency work without a permit, right?
there are. There are. I was a little nervous about it because of how difficult American Fork was being.
Hmm.
In fact, uh, they weren't very happy about it when they found out
Ah,
after the fact. But I'm glad that I took the measures. So what we
yeah.
did is immediately I came in. We put in some supports to support the upper mud brick wall that has not collapsed. With some TGI thing beams across the top, but turned to the other way and then supported it. So we kept that mud brick up there.
Okay. Yep.
And we drilled and shotcreted the entire foundation, the stack stone foundation wall with a mat of rebar and drilled all the way through the stack stone foundation into the addition foundation that was on the other side so that we could secure that foundation to the other foundation so that when we started to demo and build on top of it, we didn't risk the foundation from buckling on us. And then
Yeah.
we went upstairs and we had to demo a foot at a time and then frame, and then a foot at a time and then frame, and then a foot at a time and then frame for about 15 feet. And
Wow.
so that was a tedious process. And the wall ended up being 4.5 feet thick. Um, and so it was pretty remarkable just to bear the weight. And I got an art engineer out there to engineer all these things with stamped plans, and
Yeah.
he's going to tell me exactly what we needed to do, and I wasn't going to do it without that. So we secured it temporarily, and then we took measures to make sure that we did this the right way to make sure that that house could stand for another 150 years. And I can promise you this, that house, if it was to blow down, that wall would still stand. Maybe everything else, maybe everything else would fall down, but I promise you that wall will still be there.
Yeah, when we have our freak hurricane in Salt Lake,
That's
that
right.
one wall will survive. It's an amazing story and a really good example of the kind of unknowns that you can run into in a renovation project. You can't count on that kind of thing happening. It's very unfortunate when it happens, but it wasn't cheap to deal with it either.
Oh no. Yeah. And
Yeah.
totally unanticipated.